You're listening to My Inner Teacher with Peter Starius and Krystal Ariel. The answers you seek are within you.
So welcome, Philip. We are really excited to chat with you today. I guess maybe I should start a little bit about how I found my way to you, which was somewhere in 2017, 2018. I was telling you earlier that we were at a retreat and we were having this temazcal ceremony, this like Mexican pre-Hispanic sweat lodge. And we all started singing. We were going around in the temazcal singing. And when it was my turn, a friend told me that I started singing this very ancient Celtic sound. And I have some Irish in my family. I had never really investigated it. And after that, I decided to learn a little bit more, and I found the OBOD, and that's how I found my way to you, Tea with a Druid, and here we are. So I'm really excited to learn more about your journey and everything you studied, and just talk about the inner teacher and how it all relates.
Well, I'm so glad you invited me, and I'm so glad you kind of had that journey. And the OBOD, for those who don't know, is the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. So that's an organization that I led for 32 years or something before handing it on to a wonderful lady from Ireland, Ema. Yeah.
Oh, and I was reading that you left in 2020. What happened?
I'd been running the order been the head of the order for 32 years, and I knew that a cycle was completing, and I knew it was time to hand on the torch, and we handed it on, and we were due to do this in a big ceremony. We had a whole kind of thing worked out with workshops and, over about 5 days, a 5-day kind of festivities in Glastonbury. 600 people were coming from all over the world, and then the pandemic hit. And so we ended up doing it online, which strangely was kind of better because anybody can watch it on YouTube now, so it reached more people. And then once the pandemic was over, we actually did do it physically in Glastonbury, and that was lovely too. Yeah.
I have so many questions, and this kinship with you in so many ways, because I also have a strong connection with, let's say, not so much the Druid, but just this idea that there are beings on this planet that defy logical explanation. And that's kind of where I wanted to start with. And please forgive me if this is insulting. I hope it's not.
Oh my
I
God.
want to know what your first experience was with this kind of other type of being, and how real was it?
It's such a fascinating question. I'm fascinated by the way you use this as a kind of central theme for your podcast series, because it's one of those things, we just take this term for inner teacher and we say, oh yeah, I know what that means. Well, do you really? I mean, what does it mean? And so it's a really interesting question. And the way, first of all, inner and outer. I mean, I think it's quite interesting to question inner teacher, because I've had outer teachers and inner teachers, and I wonder what the difference is really, because they seem to function in the same way. Maybe it's just like sometimes you meet somebody who is incarnated in a physical body and they act in a way that you might lead to calling them a teacher for you. They're catalytic in some way. They say something or do something that helps you in your evolution or your spiritual development. They may not be incarnated, or you may not experience them physically. One of the most powerful experiences I had in this question of were they real or not is something that I didn't talk about until a few years ago. It was a very private experience. I mentioned it to a friend who's a professor of integrative medicine, who's been a friend for a long time, and I finally told him. And he said, well, I had exactly the same experience. And so in that spirit, I'm going to recount this experience because maybe other people have had it as well. But I, like so many of my generation, so I'm 73 now. The internet is wrong. Wikipedia is wrong, but I can't be bothered to correct it. It's flattering because it makes me younger. But so why change it? But so I was, towards the end of the 60s, early 70s, that was when, the whole flower power thing hit. And so I was one of the many thousands of people who were caught up in the psychedelic revolution, and Leary and Alpert were teaching then, and Ram Dass and so on. And I had profoundly spiritual experiences with LSD. I mean, extremely profound. And then, of course, because they were profound, I started to take it fairly often. And at a certain point, and I really don't know when that was, whether that was after, say, a dozen times or 20 times, or I mean, not a vast amount of times, but maybe 10, 20, something like that time, I was it felt as if I was taken out of my body to an abyss, and these huge beings, two huge beings, sort of were there, and they kind of said, stop, don't do this anymore. You may only cross this abyss in future by earning this and working. Find out how you can get to this plane of consciousness under your own steam, not with the aid of anything that you ingest. And so from that moment on, I stopped taking psychedelics, LSD in that case. And I began a quest. So that was at the age of, I can't remember if it was 17 or 18. It was probably early 18. By then. And I began a quest. I'd started my quest into exploring consciousness a couple of years earlier because I'd met my Druid teacher, an outer teacher, when I was 11, but then late, I started training with him when I was 16. I asked if I could train with him when I was 16. So I'd already kind of started walking the path, if you see what I mean. But this experience reinforced an understanding and a kind of goal to explore these states of consciousness. So for the next 50 years, 18 to 68, something like that, I didn't take any psychedelics. And then different things happened. So, maybe it's getting, ahead of ourselves there. But so that felt intensely real. But in thinking about what is an inner teacher, what have been your experiences of an inner teacher, I feel it's like virtually everything in this world that has a name to it. If you talk about a policeman, a psychologist, an artist, a teacher, a doctor, you need to tend to jump to the fact that we know what that means. Oh yeah, he's a doctor. But what you have to say is, what kind of a doctor? Is he a doctor of philosophy? Is he a medical doctor? Is he a specialist? Is he a neurologist? I mean, like, what sort of policeman is he? Is he a detective? Is he, and so I think it's the same thing with the term teacher, inner teacher, outer teacher, that there are lots of different kinds. That's the thing. And that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, of course. This it's all mysterious, isn't it? And how comfortable are we to live with mystery? To me, that essence of being human is to make a relationship with mystery, because obviously it's a realm beyond our logical minds, and yet it's a very human thing. Interested in with this conversation with you specifically is this idea of, there are cultures around the world that identify with certain types of unusual states of being, and I'm talking about physical being now, as in Yetis, Bigfoot in Native American culture, in the Irish culture, this kind of comfortable with little people and druids, etc. Fairies, exactly.
Yeah, the fairy world. Yeah.
And I've spent a lot of time in Iceland, and it's the same in Iceland, that they have this tradition, this culture, this intelligence that survives thousands, tens of thousands of years. So is it just collective insanity, or how do we define it? And you're the first expert that I've been able to have a conversation with. I have Bigfoot stickers all over my house here at home. And because I've had relationships in the dream state, and also living in the Rocky Mountains in northern New Mexico, where there's a strong tradition in the Native American tribes of this creature, Bigfoot. So this is where I'm so excited, as you can tell a little bit. I'm like a fan already of yours just because of your credentials. So what I want to know is how do you bridge back and forth, and how do you talk to people who think you're insane? Because I've had people think I'm insane, and I'm curious how you handle it.
Well, maybe I've just been lucky. Maybe it's being in British culture, there's this whole thing of politeness and embarrassment. It's like, John Cleese once famously said, I don't remember, it's Fish Called Wanda, this fantastic film, and he was talking about making the movie, and he talks about how in Britain you'd rather die than be embarrassed. You'd rather marry somebody, you know, and that's why do you remember in Four Weddings and a Funeral, the key scene is where he's just about to marry somebody, and then he changes his mind. Well, the one of the reasons it's so powerful, certainly for a British audience, is you would never do that. You'd go through the whole thing because it would be too embarrassing to kind of chicken out at the altar. So strangely enough, I have had I'm trying to think of any times that people have overtly acted as if they think I'm mad. I don't think I've had that experience, actually. They might have been thinking it, but they were super polite. Didn't say it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Go ahead, Krystal.
I actually do want to know, though, have you experienced a fairy? Because I follow this, I guess it's like a thread or a channel on Reddit, and it's the fairy channel on Reddit. And so people, post pictures where they see tiny little flowers and mushrooms gathered in like a circle or something like that. And they're like, oh, look, there's fairy magic here. And it sounds wonderful. But I guess, like connecting with Peter's question, like how do you actually experience that and know that you're experiencing that and understand what you're experiencing?
Okay. Well, one of the great gifts, one of the kind of central ideas on walking the spiritual path is that when you come into alignment, it's like your destiny, or if you can align your mind and your heart, your body and your soul together, these wonderful synchronicities occur, and you're kind of led along the path. It's you leading it at some profound level, but also you're led. So what happened almost immediately after I had the experience I recounted of seeing these great inner guides, if you like, who warned me, is I went to Ireland, and I was taught a way of journeying in the other world by this wonderful woman who became an outer teacher for me, if you like, and she's now an inner teacher because she's passed on. But she taught me a way of traveling in the other world that was so powerful. I guess nothing can be as powerful as actually taking something like LSD, because you're actually ingesting something that's incredibly powerful. But nevertheless, with this experience that she gave me, this particular method that she taught me, I had these really powerful experiences of contacting beings in the other world. And one of them was a fairy, in the sense that they were nature spirit of such, and it was the nature spirit of a mountain. And it was just this tremendous being that I encountered, of energy and color, and they didn't convey any teaching to me. So, maybe I wouldn't classify it as a teacher, although, of course, when you get into this whole thing, everything is teaching you all the time. I think of him as a he in this case. He seemed to have this kind of masculine energy. The one thing that the kind of the impact it had on me was say, oh, you're real. It's like, because we doubt these things. Like, is it a collective delusion? Is it just a story? Is it kid stuff? And it's like, oh, you're real. That was the major feeling that I had. Oh, you're real. And I haven't had that experience again. It was a one-time experience. So, yeah.
So I want to take this conversation into these traditions, that the traditions that have been accepted almost without question for thousands and thousands of years, because it's so ingrained in our cellular makeup in a way. It is in our minds, in our emotions, etc. When you call yourself, or maybe you don't call yourself, other people call you like this scholar in these traditions. Is that a fair description?
Hey, quick note. Peter's Inner Teacher Academy is launching soon. If this is resonating with you, head over to innerteacheracademy.com and grab a spot on the waitlist. These trainings are intimate and space is limited. So if you want to be first in line, tap the link in the description below and sign up.
You can also see details about my 2025 retreats at some incredible locations around the world, like Iceland, Austria, California, and New Zealand. Attendance at these trainings will count towards in-person hours for the Inner Teacher Academy. And now let's get back to the magic.
I wouldn't use that term myself. It's a bit of a scary term, isn't it? Scholar.
Yeah, it is scary.
I know a whole lot of stuff,
But I mean, you're an external teacher. You've done a lot of intellectual and experiential exploring into these traditions. Is it mass delusion? Is this? And here's why I think there's a possibility. Only
Yeah.
because I don't want to believe that it is, but the fact that we have almost around the globe cultures that have some form of this. Maybe it's mushroom induced, maybe it's just
It's just a kind of delusion. No, I truly don't think so. I've had so many different experiences of this phenomenon of what seem to be intelligences that are sometimes I really sense that they are not me. They are outside of me. Sometimes I have been, I couldn't, it feels like it's me, some other level of me, the soul. I've had so many experiences of these that I'm convinced of their reality. I mean, in the end, only each of us can make that decision. But I've had experiences where it's debatable. I could debate with myself about whether it's my soul speaking to me, or whether it's another being, whether I've imagined it, or not. That's happened a lot. But there have been times when that hasn't been the case. And one of the most powerful times, do you remember harmonic convergence? Do you remember that
of
time?
course. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was in Alsace in the mountains, and I decided to go for a walk at dawn to kind of mark the harmonic convergence, to do a meditation at dawn. And I walked up this mountain path and I got really high up, and I sat there and I kind of tuned in and did a meditation, and nothing special happened. So I kind of completed it and stood up, and I started to walk down the mountain. And then I had this profound sense that there was a being standing where I had been sitting, calling me back. An invisible being, if you like, not a physical being, an inner being. So I kind of just stopped and closed my eyes and said, okay, well, since we're in contact, I don't need to physically walk back up the hill to to talk to you. We're like, we are all one, and we're all connected. And this figure said, no, you need to come back to me. And I ignored it. I mean, it was, I guess I was tired and hungry, and, I didn't want to walk all the way back up that hill. And my philosophical position was, well, if we're on the phone, I don't need to come and see, like I don't need to fly to Mexico and California. We're here, we're talking. And
Yeah, exactly.
then I started to walk down the hill, and there's this extraordinary, it's so hard to explain, but there was this feeling of almost like betrayal, like it was really the wrong thing to do. I really shouldn't be doing this. And this overwhelming sense of, no, you have to go back. So in the end, I just had to, it was like a kind of magnetic pull. I turned around, I walked back up to the place where I'd been sitting, and I sat down and said, okay, I've come back. And then the most beautiful experience occurred, which is really easy for me to explain in words. But of course, the reality was profound. I mean, tears were streaming down, and it was an extraordinary kind of opening of consciousness. This being said, yes, it's true that I am a part of you, and I exist beyond space-time, so you don't need to displace yourself in space-time to get to me. But I am also separate from you. And the kind of poignancy of this being saying, I am separate from you, had this heart-opening effect. It was, and the only, and it has, so it was just an extraordinary experience of my heart being, and in fact, my life changed very dramatically from that day onwards, because that was when I ended it. I ended a 17-year relationship with my wife, actually, that day. So it was actually a very significant kind of shift, and I think I needed that experience to open my heart and sort of be connected to my true deep self. So it was actually an incredibly significant moment in my life. But I'm just trying. There was something I wanted to say, and I've just lost the thread of it for the moment. But it was, and this, I've never spoken to this being again. It's not like this being became my inner teacher, or it was an experience I had, some exchange of. Yes, I know what I wanted to say. It was, when you fall in love in the midst of the deepest kind of moment, when you fall madly in love with somebody, it's like you don't know where you end and they begin, and it's just like we're all one, and you and I are the same, and 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 then there's that sort of kind of exquisite moment where you read, well, no, I am actually a person, and I'm out here, it's like, and there's something incredibly beautiful about that. And that's part of the experience of being in love, that you feel like you're one, but you're also not.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like that. Yes, I am one with you. I'm a part of you, kind of thing. Yes, we are one. There's no different. But I'm not as well. And that was very, very beautiful.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
I
that's
I
beautiful.
love when you mentioned earlier about the two beings that met you and they told you, like, you need to stop and you need
Yeah.
to basically learn how to get here on your own without any help.
Yeah. You see,
Because I think,
sorry, I was just going to say, sorry to interrupt you, but like, I've never met them again. But the weird thing was, my friend who had the same experience, he had the same experience. So, like, who are those two beings?
wow,
You know,
with the same two beings?
well, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, that's the mystery. Maybe that's their job or something. Maybe there are two. Maybe there are lots of them. Is this
Yeah.
something that our psyches generate? Was it a projection of our own soul, knowing that we needed to kind of stop and change tack? And
Mm-hmm.
we don't know. These are mysteries, as Peter, you said.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the reason I brought that up is because I wanted to confirm, I guess, this experience that you've had with nature spirits, because the first time I tried San Pedro, and I think plant medicine is really beautiful to help you, to help open the door, open your eyes, open your heart. And San Pedro is known as the keys to heaven, Saint Peter's keys to heaven. And they open you up to the plant world, which before I did that, plants were, I mean, I knew they were alive and they were beautiful and I like to look at them, but they were, no different than a piece of furniture in a way to me. And after that experience, connecting with them telepathically, not with words, just, like noticing a plant there. And like you said, you're like, oh, wow, you're real. Like I see you.
Yeah.
I notice your presence there. And yeah, at first you're like, what is this? Am I going crazy? But I think a lot about how, birds see such a wider spectrum of color than humans, and, other animals, and can sense things. There's so much we don't know about dimensions. And there was
Absolutely.
this video that I was watching with Neil deGrasse Tyson about, how to experience the ninth dimension. And, he starts off with 2D. And when we look at a piece of paper, someone who's living in a 2D world cannot see 3D. They can't comprehend it. They're just in their 2D and we're out here. And then when you're in 3D, you can't comprehend 4D, although there may be beings around us that we can't see that actually perform surgeries within us, which I've heard stories of people having spiritual surgeries performed. And you're like, okay, what kind of hocus pocus is that? But if that were true, this 4D, then you would be able to conduct surgery inside of a person without ever cutting them open. So it's just like, these unseen, these things that we cannot grasp because we are in 3D, but maybe in those moments you're catching a glimpse of the other dimensions.
Exactly. It's like, an extraordinary dream. Sometimes you can have a dream that is totally, I think Jung called them big dreams. There's a lot of dreams are what you might call daytime residue dreams, where you kind of recognize that, the influence of what you were watching on the television the night before, and, so on. But sometimes you can have a dream that is almost supernatural. There's an energy in there. There's a light. There's a kind of almost like a transmission that is powerful. And that's, I think, when we glimpse the fact that we're actually living in this multi-dimensional world that is so beautiful and extraordinary, and and that it's almost like we've in order to function at this level, we need to put the filters on. That's why Aldous Huxley called his book The Doors of Perception. We've had to close the doors because at our current stage of evolution, the spectrum that we can see is limited. I think what's interesting is then to say, maybe what's happening now is that more of us can broaden that spectrum a bit and allow in more data, if you like, more experience, without going nuts I mean, you remember how I kind of, and I'm just thinking of my parents, my grandparents' generation. I mean, like as you go back, I don't know whether people got more and more uptight as we go back in time, but this is just my experience, but I think probably shared by a lot of people, is that my parents were a little more inhibited and limited in their kind of perspective than my generation were. I mean, that was part of the whole 60s thing, was breaking out of the rather narrow mindset, and then their parents, it would have been even narrower and so on. So I think, like, what we're doing now, wouldn't have happened 100 years ago. I mean, it's just like, except for this kind of vanguard of, this concept of the initiates or the spiritual seekers, I guess, have always been there. And that's what, they've always been doing, is, the Buddha meditating under the Bodhi tree, trying to break out of the ceiling of consciousness and access a wider dimension.
Do you think that your experience in the 60s is what created the present day you? Or do you think before that, like would you have said, if you reflect back on your early childhood years, were you different then? Were you different than your friends, your siblings, your family? That, like, did you have any sense at an early age, or was it just the 60s, the era captured you and gave you a detour pass to avoid monotony or ordinary or normal? Because I don't think you would call yourself normal, right?
I don't even know what that word means anymore. Well, my prior to the age of 11, I can remember very little, but and I think this is probably a false. Well, I don't know if this is a false memory. You know what happens with memory, is that, your parents tell you stories about what you did as a kid, and then you think you're remembering that, but actually you're remembering what they told you. So when I was 4 years old, and it feels like I can remember this, that I saw a woman walking across the sitting room I saw a ghost, a woman wearing blue. And then I said to my parents and some friends who were there, "Who is that woman in blue?" And they all laughed at me. And then I started crying because, they didn't believe me and they couldn't see this woman. Then when I was 11, I met the chief druid. He was a friend of my dad's. That was just a physical meeting, like, oh, hello, he was a friend of the family. I read a book called The Life of the Buddha. I started going to, there was a chain of shops in London at that time called China Craft. And they sold kind of sticks of incense and images of the Buddha and kind of Chinese prints of, hermits and caves and on mountains and all the rest of it. And I would spend all my pocket money on burning incense and buying Buddha figures. And I was asked to give, and I read The Life of the Buddha, and it felt like the light got switched on. Reading The Life of the Buddha, it was like, well, this is the only game in town. This is the only thing worth doing, is seeking enlightenment. And in my class, I was asked to, I must have talked about it in a religious education class, because the teacher asked me to give a talk on Buddhism. So at the age of 11, possibly 12, again, I can't remember, early 12, late 11, I'm sitting in a class with these Buddha figures, burning incense, talking to my peers about Buddhism.
Wow.
But I'm also, at that age as well, I act in the only school play I was ever asked to act in. And I had to stick on a beard and be a psychoanalyst. And I had to sort of smoke a pipe, which I couldn't do. I was so nervous. They wanted me to actually light the tobacco. 11-year-old kid, can you imagine that? They would never do that now, would they? But my teacher wanted me to smoke it, but I was so nervous in front of the audience, I couldn't. So I had to psychoanalyze somebody, And there's a guy called James Hillman, who's a neo-Jungian analyst, who suggests, he has this lovely idea called the acorn theory, of how your future is echoed in your childhood. He says we always think of ourselves as a product of the past, but maybe we're a product of the future. He kind of turns it all around, And so the two themes of spirituality, seeking enlightenment, Buddhism in this case, and spiritual seeking and psychotherapy and psychoanalysis were there from the age of 11. And my father was surrounded by very interesting people. He knew psychoanalysts as friends, and he always had interesting books lying around and stuff like that. So I was kind of immersed in that. And then when I was 16, I turned to the Druid teacher and I said, "Can I study with you?" And that's when I started visiting him, and he started teaching me. So that, I forgot what the question was, but that was the answer.
It's perfect. No, it's perfect. I love The beautiful thing about this experience of hosting a podcast with Krystal is that we meet the most refreshingly original people, unique to right back to the beginning.
Yeah.
To me, it makes the world less lonely in a way. I've felt that loneliness of being different since I was very young. And
Yeah.
so to kind of share notes with a fellow freak.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it is amazing. You know, if I reflect back on my childhood, growing up in a conservative second generation immigration family is so beyond odds that I've turned into this person who's a podcast host and a yoga teacher and have had these experiences, similar experiences that you've had of connecting with, you know, a story I haven't told on this podcast was I'm also an architect, and I had an experience in my life of going through divorce and kind of being confused and lost. And here I get this job as an architect to help the new Camaldoli Hermitage in Big Sur, California, redesign some of their monk shelters, the cells that these monks live in. And so here I am, not really connected at that point to anything that profoundly spiritual. And the first part of my work is to fly with the head, I forget his title, the head of this hermitage. We fly to Italy to the original Camaldoli Hermitage in Tuscany. And we flew to Rome, and we spent, this is a wild story, we spent a night in the Vatican. They have a hotel just for visiting guests in the Vatican.
Yeah.
And it's right across the street from the Colosseum. So I'm in this Vatican hotel looking straight across at this ancient, you know, Colosseum. And I'm going, where am I going? You know? And so there was all this, I just felt all of a sudden crowded in a way with energies that I wasn't fully understanding in terms of the history of the place and the generation of, uh, you know, this religious culture. We get up to this Camaldoli Hermitage in Tuscany, and it happened to be, there were numerous ones, but this main one that myself and the Big Sur, call him Deacon for lack of a better word, were there, and they put me in one of these cells. They call them cells, which is interesting in these hermitages. And then I had this vivid dream, or I thought it was real, just like your experience, where there was someone sitting in this little chair in this, I mean, the cell only had a window that was like this big to the outside. There was just enough ambient light at night to kind of make out form. And there was a form sitting in this chair in this cell, and it wakes me, and I look over at it, and it's just a shadow. And the shadow is not speaking words, but I'm feeling things. And it felt like it was there to let me know that it was still there. And I wasn't frightened by it, but I didn't sleep the rest of the night, you know, and it faded and it went away. And so in the morning, I had breakfast with a dozen or so monks. We all shared in this dining room and had this experience, and people could tell that something had changed with me. And one of the monks asked me, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Well, I wasn't going to share this, but I'm going to share it now since you asked, is I had a visitor last night in my cell, and they knew about it. They I don't know if they had intentionally put me in that cell, but it turned out that this hermitage and this part of the hermitage, this was where the rebellious monks went as punishment. And in particular, this one monk that supposedly, as the story goes, that was persecuted for something that a lot of people think that he never did, but he was eventually killed, which is wild. I know, that's pretty drastic.
Yeah.
And so there was this, I think those monks were aware of the afterworld, and that this monk was part of this afterworld, and they were comfortable with it. And that whole experience, I think this is only the second time I've even shared this story,
Yeah.
was profound for me at that moment in my life. And since that moment, I've had dozens of experiences of, and again, it's not a physical presence so much as it is just an energetic presence of what I would call angels. And for lack of a better word, I don't have one, or guardian from another dimension that has intervened in my life to guide me. And so is it like, I love your question about, is it inner teacher? Is it outer teacher? Is it part of self? Is it a separate self? And I think what Krystal, maybe I love that idea of the ninth dimension. I sense that boundary, that kind of artificial boundary between inner and outer, as we move higher in the dimension, maybe those boundaries aren't as solid, that maybe they're much more porous.
Mm.
And I can't imagine what it might be like, but yogically speaking, I've had out of body experiences. So I know what that feels like, that I can
Mm.
detach and look down on my physical body laying on a bed or laying on the ground. So yeah, I'm the mystery for me is this: do we need to know? No, I don't think we need to know. It's as real. I wrote in my book this idea of grace. Grace to me is as real as gravity is.
Mm.
Gravity is this invisible force of physical invisible force, and grace is this invisible non-physical force.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, yeah. Thank you for telling us about that. Yes, I mean this sense of angel. You know, again, angels. What are they? I went for a walk. This was probably about 5 years ago. We have a lovely garden there, and there's a sort of side door into a little lane that I can go and walk by the stream there. And I walked down there, and as I came out of started walking down the lane, I had this sense, and the immediate sense to me came of an angel, a kind of angelic presence. And the reason why, I mean, it just came to me, and the feeling was, you know, when we say the word angelic, it has a quality, doesn't it? You know, it's light and it's bright and it's beautiful and warm and loving and it's kind of high vibration, if you like. There's a part of me that's so skeptical. Inside, I've got a kind of inner skeptic. And I thought, but hang on a minute. It's like, it feels separate to me. It feels like about 6 feet away. That's kind of strange. And I was walking down and then I kind of acknowledged it. And it was this sense continued, you see. And then it kind of disappeared. And I went for the walk and I kind of forgot about it. And then as I was walking back, I thought, hang on a minute. I had this really strange experience. Like there was an angel next to me. What's that about? And I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll go into the little garden house that we have with my laptop and I'll just kind of try and have a conversation with this angelic being. I'll try and tune in again. And I went and got my laptop. I went into this little garden house that I hadn't been in for probably 6 months, sat down at the desk, closed my eyes, kind of tuned in, opened my eyes, and found myself looking at a postcard with an image of an angel climbing in through a window to illustrate a Keats poem. And our daughter had bought it and put it there, you know, a year ago. I just hadn't, you know, didn't know it was there. She'd put it there, hadn't told us. And then I asked the angel questions. And it was the easiest. I turned it into a little book called The Winged Psyche. It was the easiest little book I've ever written because I asked the angel questions and I just got answers and I wrote them out and published it. And yeah.
That's cool. It's like conversations with God.
Where can I get a copy of that book?
It's the wing. If you on my website, which is just myname.com, under books, there's a tab that says books, and you'll see it says The Winged Psyche. Very short. It's just, you know, it's just 30 pages. It's a little booklet, really, 30 pages. And you can get an ebook or a printed copy online if you just follow the links. So my experience of inner teachers has been that there are lots of different kinds. That there are, you know, that it's not. I think when one uses the term, it's possible that people think that there's this sort of group of beings on the other side whose kind of job it is to teach people, you know, and be their inner teachers and teach them stuff. And you get allocated a teacher. So you, at some point in your meditations or in your spiritual life, you kind of make contact with it. And maybe people do. I'm not dismissing this idea, sure. Maybe there are people who make contact with an inner teacher, and then that's a kind of relationship they have throughout. I mean, can I ask you two? I mean, do you have that? Have you had like one inner teacher who is your teacher, and you've had the same kind of communications from them all through your life?
I haven't had that, but I have heard from many people that you have one guardian angel, and that
Yeah.
is like like you were saying, allocated inner teacher.
Allocated teacher. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I feel like at different moments I've had, like my grandfather has passed on. Sometimes he comes to me, or sometimes I feel him giving me some sort of a message.
Sure.
Like you can be in different situations and you
Yeah.
feel like so and so is here for this
Well,
thing.
it's like the team concept.
Yeah.
I think that's my sense of it. There are a number of beings who for instance, when my Druid teacher died, for probably about 9 years, I had no sense of any contact with him at all. Quite extraordinary. He died in 1975. But then, 1984, I was meditating. At that time, I was doing a kind of Zazen meditation, which is I was just emptying myself, and I was just sitting in emptiness, having no experiences. The idea wasn't, just sitting, as they say, just sitting. And suddenly he was there, and he started telling me stuff. And for about 7 years, I used to have these incredibly vivid dreams, where he would come to me and talk to me and so on. And then that stopped, and very occasionally, he will come to me. But so there's a number of teachers like that who, I think, just as in real life, you would have that. You would have a mentor or a friend who's particularly significant for you for a certain number of years, and then maybe that changes, and then you have another mentor kind of figure who's really helps you. And that makes sense to me. I like a little team of people who you work with.
Makes sense to me too. I really want to ask you this question before we run out of time. And we still have time, but before we run out, because I was reading about how you studied Pan-yrhythmia dance and Sophrology. And I was like, ooh, what is that? And I'm thinking, like, is the Pan-yrhythmia, is that like the Pan?
No, Pan-yrhythmia
Like the
was
mythical
developed by
Pan?
it was developed by a Bulgarian spiritual teacher. He died in 1945, I think it was, or 47, in Sofia in Bulgaria. And he developed this dance, this kind of mystical dance that you can, if you Google it, you can see films of people doing it up in the mountains in Bulgaria. And one of his followers, became a guru in France, Omram Mikhail Ivanov, and we came across him and studied with him when this was with my first wife, who was French, and we studied with him for about 7 years, and then we started going to Bulgaria and connecting with what was called the Brotherhood there. So the Pan-yrhythmia comes from that. It's a series of dance movements that are kind of supposed to help you spiritually, if you like. And Sophrology is a system developed by a Colombian neuropsychiatrist, which is a kind of embodied mindfulness practice that I trained in. And I've written a book about it, and I do online training courses and so on.
Very cool. You want to say something, Peter?
Well, I have these so-called random things show up in my life at what would you call it? At critical times in my life, I've had these random things, so-called random things, coincidence, whatever you want to call it, show up. And one of them, while I was writing my book, I wrote this book, and it was a painful process for me in the sense that I didn't never consider myself a writer. And so I struggled a lot with, well, how would a writer write this? But then I got over my kind of self-judgment and just started writing. And I've reached a point where I was almost finished with the book, and I had a writer's block. I couldn't understand what the book was missing, but something was missing. And what ended up happening was I had a hard deadline with the publisher that I had to meet. And I was going traveling, and I'm looking down at the kind of early morning, the sun hadn't come up yet, to catch a taxi to the airport. And this book I see on the coffee table that my wife, I was relating to that story of you seeing something that your daughter had put. So there's this book there that I didn't know what it was, but in the light, I could see that it was titled The Biology of Belief. I don't know if you're familiar with that book by Bruce Lipton,
Yeah.
but yeah, so I pick it up, and that was the missing piece for that opened up a whole world of science that my book was lacking in that moment.
Yeah.
And this morning I just came back from Mexico where I got to meet Krystal and her husband for the first time in person, because
Right.
we met online, and,
Yeah.
and the two of them are really awesome online, and I'm happy to say they're awesome in person. So it was really a wonderful thing. But we have this project to launch a educational academy called the Inner Teacher Academy, publishing all this stuff and get ready. And so I'm personally trying to refine what it is that I want to teach people. And I just came across this quote this morning as I'm eating my breakfast and looking at the news. And it had to do with this man, author, poet, who ended up becoming the first president of the Czech Republic after the fall. And I can't remember his name because it's a name difficult to pronounce. But what he was talking about as he was leaving the office. Yes. No, it was
Somebody else.
before.
Maybe.
Is it? Well, maybe it is. Maybe that's how you pronounce it. But
Yeah.
anyway, what he said was this, and I'm going to read it to you. The coming era, what we need is a radical renewal of self, a sense of responsibility. He didn't say self, a sense of responsibility. And that was so powerful for me this morning when I read that, because what it said to me was this era that we are in, specifically post-pandemic era, is that we got lazy in many ways as a species. I think humans got a little lazy with that sense of responsibility of this gift we've been given to live in this era, this magnificent planet. And we deferred our responsibility to experts. And what I'm feeling is that there's enough of us, and this present company included, and those listeners that are out there listening, watching this, are interested in maybe this idea that there is this optimistic sense that there is this groundswell of movement back towards a sense of responsibility to talk, like you said earlier. Like, I haven't shared this story that often, but now you're sharing it. And I'm comfortable now sharing it because I'm sharing it in an environment that we've created with this podcast and what I hope to teach in this academy, where we start to connect. And digitally is an important part of this. We're talking to you, and this is where technology to me has been just a godsend, a gift. And yeah, I'm really inspired by this conversation we're having. So thank you for this
Pleasure. I think this
opportunity.
is the power of ideas. Once I was in New York, and I'd met this very sort of high-powered literary agent through a lovely sort of synchronicity, and he said, "Why do you want to write? There's loads of people writing books. Like, why do you want to add to the pile of books that are being written?" And nobody sort of asked such a direct question to me before, And I said, because I love and believe in the power of ideas. You just need one idea. You need to read one idea, and it can change your life. You can be given one word of advice. Please don't go in that direction. Do this. One idea, and it can open up. And so I think you're right. And now we have this tremendous opportunity as well with the internet to be able to work with that concept, if you like.
I don't want this conversation to end. We had so many other things here to grab from. So, I mean, Philip, I hope that you will come back. Would you be open to coming back and doing another episode?
I'd be really open to coming and chatting with you again. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. It was really lovely to meet you.
Well,
Thank you
great to
for
meet you, and
joining
I
us
love
today.
your idea of your project. And I think it's such an interesting one because what you're doing is you're unpacking an idea, a term that people just use. We use terms and we think we know what they mean. Oh, inner teacher. Yeah, that means, I know what that means. Well, actually start to unpack it. And, what can it? And of course, it becomes very rich. becomes very rich, and there's all sorts of levels, and they're not exclusive, and everybody's different, and you can honor difference, but you can also. I was interviewing earlier a lady called Tiffany Lazic, who's written a book about psychopomps and the journey of the psychopomp, taking you into the after death, into the other world. It's fascinating. And she's teased out at least 7 different kinds of psychopomp. And again, you think you know what it is. It's one thing. Well, it's not. And it's like the term psychotherapy. If you say, I'm going to see a psychotherapist, well, you need to know which kind. I mean, are they doing cognitive behavioral? Are they Freudian? Are they
Jungian?
And they're all, you're going to have very different experiences. They're going to be very different people you're talking to. So great. Yeah. Good luck with all that work.
That's right. You also have a podcast. I don't think I usually listen to your Tea with a Druid, which, by the way, when I told my husband Israel that we were going to be speaking to you, he's like, oh, the voice, the man with the voice. Because he always hears me when I'm listening to your meditations.
You can hear the voice in the background. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. What's the name of your podcast?
It's called This Magical Life.
This Magical
Life. And it started because Tea with a Druid is deliberately a short format. It's just 15 minutes of chat, 15 minutes meditation. And I started interviewing people who were so interesting. I wanted to talk for longer than 15 minutes. So This Magical Life is a longer form one.
Okay, nice.
Good.
Well,
take a listen.
I'm also grateful for you being here. I look forward to season 2 to talk to you again. And thank you.
Great. Pleasure. Okay. See you. Bye then. Bye.
That's it for this episode. Be well and stay open to the teacher within. If you've enjoyed our time together, follow or subscribe and stay tuned for upcoming chats you don't want to miss.